So I'm here with Nancy Mello. And Nancy, I'd like to ask you first, where are you based and tell us what you do?
I am based in Mystic, Connecticut. So I am a mystic in Mystic,
Love
and
it.
I am an I am an animal communicator. I am a medium. I'm an intuitive, and I'm a clairvoyant.
Love it. And I was so excited to get in touch with Nancy. And I highly recommend reading this Washington Post story. It's called Her Car Was Stolen with Her Cat Inside. Here's how she got her 19-pound calico back. Long title, but if you find the story, it's really interesting. And Nancy's mentioned in it. We're going to learn more about that story and Nancy's intuitive abilities. So let's start first, Nancy. When did you first discover your intuitive abilities?
Ever since I can remember, I grew up on a farm in Northern California, and my playmates were animals. And my brother was raising pigs for 4-H, and I just noticed that I was always drawn to them. I was always cuddling with them, and they seemed to have an understanding with me. About the age of 6, I was playing with some leftover Christmas presents, and all of a sudden, I heard in my head, all you remember about me are those expletive Christmas presents. And I kind of looked around and I ran to my mom and I said, Mom, grandma so and so just said this. And my grandmother had recently passed. And my mom took one look at me and took me to the doctor. And for the next 10 years, I was on some heavy psychotropic medications, and they had all kinds of fun diagnoses for me. So in that time, though, I realized that animals were definitely drawn to me. My mom used to joke, because we lived on a farm about 7 miles from the nearest town, and my mom would joke that any stray animals seemed to make their way back to our house, even though our house was a mile from a county road. And somehow these animals kind of seemed to make their way to me and know that I could help them, including these pigs that we had. And they just seemed to surround me, and I seemed to have an innate understanding of what these animals needed and how to help them or how to get them adopted. In addition, even with all of the fun psychotropics I was on, I was still able to foretell certain things with friends and family. And of course, I learned very quickly on not to speak about this. I was raised Catholic, and soon word got around to the nuns. And I was told that I was a devil child. And again, we were in a very, very small community. I was a devil child. I was going to hell. The nuns told all of the other kids to shun me and to not associate with me because I was going to hell. And so I really lived about 15 years in this small community. I lived as an outsider. I was, so in addition to having, my mental, my capacity questioned, I also was at a loss for friends. And that really threw me into a deep, deep depression that lasted close to 20 years until I really came out and was honest and was brave enough to come forward with my abilities, because I was so tired of the depression and the shame that went along with having abilities. Mainstream religion, and that's not to say, I personally identify as a Christian. I do believe in Jesus. I believe that he existed. Although I think that all of religions have good qualities. I have talked to people that have passed over from every religion, from Jewish to Buddhist to agnostic. So we all go to the same place. We just kind of speak a different language to get there. But what I found was that as growing up, I learned not to talk about it. I learned to keep quiet, and that if I was going to be accepted, I had to bury it down. And the remarkable thing is, intuitives and psychics have been around for thousands of years. In fact, I have a copy of a print, a drawing by Da Vinci that was drawn in Venice in, I believe, the 1600s. I don't recall the exact date, but I have it right next to me on my desk. And it's of a fortune teller that is stealing coins from a purse.
Right.
And it was during the time, it was actually a political cartoon, and Da Vinci was making political statement because gypsies, palm readers were not allowed in Venice. They banned them. And when I saw this drawing, which is not very well known, I happened to be on a trip to London. It was in the Royal Gallery of all places. And I saw this picture and it just made so much sense to me because intuitives have been around for thousands of years. There have been historical records of intuitives, and not all of them are bad. But we don't know a lot about the good ones. We don't ever really talk about the good ones. Now, we've heard of Edgar Cayce and Sylvia Browne, and we've heard of some real notable ones, but we don't ever really emphasize the good. We talk a lot about doctors, and we have all of these helpers in the world, right? But we don't ever talk about psychics or intuitives as helpers. They're always the witches, the ones that are misleading. And so for most of my life, I either thought I was cursed, or I thought that I was damned. And that was terrifying for someone that had animals just kind of drawn to her, just like right now, my dog's trying to get me to pet her. I thought that was it. And I thought I was really destined to be depressed, that I deserved this because that's what religion told me. That's what these nuns told me. And it wasn't until I went to go kill myself, and this was not my first suicide attempt. And I kind of threw it out to God, and I said, why do I have these abilities? I'm introverted. I've done all the right things. I've followed the rules, and I'm still not happy. I'm still horribly depressed. I have children. I did everything I was supposed to do, and I still have these abilities. Why do I have these abilities? And I remember just yelling it. And the answer came to me that I either needed to start using these abilities to help people and animals, or I could end my life and end it there and let my abilities kind of control my own destiny, or control what I was going to do, that shame. Yeah. And that was it. That was that moment where I said, okay, that there must be good in it. But unfortunately, there's not enough mainstream conversations about this, about there are people of varying abilities that have this. A lot more of us are intuitive, but we don't admit it. I was speaking with a gentleman not too long ago, an older gentleman, and he had lost his dog, and he kind of quietly admitted that he knew things about his dog. And I could tell this was not anything that he had ever admitted before. Here's a very, a guy in a very stereotypical kind of man. And he just kind of quietly said, no, I know what they're saying. Mm-hmm. And I was so grateful that he felt safe enough to say that, and to think that there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that have these abilities, but we've allowed that fear because just like with every profession, there's goods and bads. Of every different profession, of every different, of the helpers. But we focus so much on the bad that we're not focusing on the good. And if we see people that are doing good, if we see intuitives that are doing good, we wonder what their angle is. We wonder, well, what is their goal? What's their problem? And for me, that's why in the last 3 years that I've been doing this professionally, beyond before when I was using it to get cute boys to kiss me, or, it was a lot of fun.
Lucky you. I want that ability, but anyways.
That was so much fun. It did not work on my spouse. It totally did not work on my spouse. When I met him, I was like, I can hear people. And he's like, yeah, what? But he's also an engineer. He's actually a Navy sailor. And so he kind of looked at me with his eyebrows and he was like, yeah, whatever. But
that's
actually,
not cute.
Funny. No, he was like, yeah, no. But it's so funny because that was, I've been married 14 years now. And it was so funny because now my spouse, who when we got together was Protestant and very conservative and everything. And he has since discovered Buddhism. And then last night he was actually asking me, one of our cats, we're living apart, unfortunately, because of the military right now. One of our cats is living with him. And he's like, so can you tell me what's going on with her? And I honestly didn't understand the question because he's never asked me to read our pets before. It's always like, well, you do that. And I can't prove it, but I accept that you have these abilities. But he's like, can you ask her? And I was like, what, really? And he's like, yeah, I need some help. And so I was like, okay. And so so the cat, he was feeding her on the floor. And I said, well, she wants to eat up on the counter. And he said, well, that's not going to happen. I said, no, but she wants to eat up on the counter because she kept meowing during the call. He's like, why does she keep saying? I'm like, well, feed her up higher. And so I just talked to him this afternoon and he's like, you're right. I put her on the counter and that's where she wants to, or put her on the table and that's where she wants to eat. So even my ultra conservative husband
I love it.
But that's the thing is, it's understanding that not everyone that has these abilities is bad. And that's why I do try and live so authentically. I never hide behind a question. I'm always as honest as I can be. I'm not, see, I said, we were just talking about before how we're trying to avoid the ums and
We're trying to avoid the ums, but we're human. We'll do our best.
No. So we were talking about how it's amazing what just accepting a gift can do
100%.
and accepting yourself as is. And because of that, when you accept that there are things that no one understands, but as I say on my website, faith is believing the impossible is possible. To believe that there's more than meets the eye, to quote Transformers, is so huge. And I'm not afraid to say, I don't know. I'm not afraid to say, I'm not sure. And I'm going to be wrong. Every psychic, every animal communicator, we're going to be wrong. We're not perfect. We're not God. But if you earnestly allow us to come in and try to help, it's amazing the changes that can take place. But there are people like me out there that are trying to help, that are trying to be authentic, that aren't putting on any airs. That was another thing I told friends for years. I don't want to be a psychic because I thought psychics all wore veils and spoke in hushed tones and had candles everywhere. And here I am, drinking my soda and cursing and yelling at my kids. And I thought I couldn't be a psychic because I didn't match all the boxes. Here I was for 37 years trying to be so normal. And then I realized, no, like I need to be authentically me. So that means people ask me what I do in my free time. I watch Real Housewives. I watch The Bachelor.
Yeah, we're normal people.
I totally am on board with Housewives. I love Bravo. I'm all about I have a Peloton, I ride, I work out. Like I am so beyond normal. And I'm not perfect. I joke like, everyone's like, oh, you're great. No, I yell at my kids. You just don't see it. You see my highlight reel. But I think it's important to really, if you're going to have these abilities and show them, then really also show the not so great things that we can be normal. Because if you're trying to show perfection, then of course that stereotype is going to be you can't be anything else.
Right. You're saying so many things that my mind is like, I want to ask about this and this and this. Amazing. So first of all, about they're talking about skeptics, or like people who seem like they're not very open to believing in what we do. I can't tell you how many stories I have about friends of mine who say they do not believe in this stuff. They are very, and no, all respect to mainstream religions, but like they are very tied to mainstream religion. I have this one good friend who is a very strict Catholic for the most part. But she told me, Juan, I swear to you, I've dreamt meeting you before I met you. Twice I've had dreams about you. And I remember those dreams very vividly. And I want to ask you, like, how does it work, whether in your social settings or in your marriage, in your relationships that you've had? What is it that makes a relationship of any kind work between someone like yourself who does the work you do and someone else who may not believe in it?
This is an awesome question. I don't think I've ever gotten this question in an interview. I think it's fabulous. So first of all, I'm a skeptic too. So I
love that answer. Same.
I am completely skeptic. You will see me. And I think if you go to my TikTok is nancy.mello. If you scroll way back, I have some videos where I'm like dancing. Like when I help find an animal, I do a little dance.
I love it.
There will be some sessions that like, because my Achilles heel is names. I do not get names right. And I'll be like, George, and they'll be like, yes. And I'll be like, yeah. And you can't see me, but I'm dancing right now. I totally will like start breaking out in dance moves during a session because I surprise myself. In terms of relationships, see, I said, now I'm going to hear myself every time I say, we are really normal. We are totally normal. I have 2 living children. I lost one, unfortunately, 8 years ago. My husband is military. We are such a quintessential American family, despite the fact that I am 50% Portuguese. So I've got that going for me. But we are so normal in terms of how it works in a relationship. So I told my husband when we were dating that I was a medium, that I could talk to people that had passed. And I remember the first time I told him, I said, well, this is what your grandfather is saying. He was telling you about this. He was telling me about a memory. His grandfather was saying a memory that my husband had done. And my spouse said, "Oh, no, I must have told you that." I don't think so. But then when we started doing things or making plans, I would get feelings about things and I would say, okay, I think we need to do this. We need to do that. And it wasn't very long before the intuition that I had started playing out, where I would say, okay, I think it's going to be about 3 weeks and this is going to happen. I think it's going to be this. When we were looking at purchasing a condo together, I said, I think it's going to be the first home, but I'm not gonna jinx it. I think it's going to
Mm.
be the first home. And so we go to the first condo home, and I didn't, unbeknownst to me, I didn't recall this. We went to the wrong door and we looked around. We're like, oh, okay. And it was a nice enough condo. We saw about 3 that day, and we go to dinner and talk about it. And he's like, well, what did you think of each one? We're going through each one. And we go back to the first one, and he says, Nancy, we went to the wrong door. I was like, what? We went to the wrong door? Well, he had gone to the wrong door on our first date. He had picked me up. He had gone to the door next, and I looked through the window and
Wow.
waved at him. And that kind of became the thing, is he went to the wrong door. And so we
Wow.
went to the wrong, so he caught it and he's like, Nancy, we went to the wrong door. That's it. And so sure enough, that was the condo that we purchased. So what we often joke about is I'm the one that gets these feelings. Okay, I think we need to be doing this. I think we need to be doing that. This is what I think we need to be planning. And he's very the rational side. So he's the engineer. He's the one that puts the plans in motion. He's the one that really figures out the backside of it, but I'm definitely the emotion. My kids dislike having a psychic mother because I can tell when they're lying.
I couldn't handle it if I were a psychic's kid, but
My daughter is turning 12 this coming month, and she absolutely cannot stand it. Absolutely cannot stand it.
we teenagers, we lied as teenagers. Like,
Oh,
hello.
100%. And I just look at her and I just say, really? Really? And she goes, I hate this. I hate this. Now my 7-year-old son thinks it's the coolest thing ever.
So
But
far.
yeah, so far. No, it really is very simpatico. Like, it's very
Yeah.
normal. It's only when we're planning things, or sometimes I will get bad feelings. Unfortunately, before the coronavirus hit, I did have a feeling that something really bad was about to happen. It was a very much feeling of foreboding. And then
Mm.
at the time, I actually got it confused with there was some international thing going on in January or February, and I actually thought that was it. But I remember talking to my mom on the phone, and I said, a lot of people are going to die, and it's going to be a very, very dark time. I said, something is coming. And I honestly thought it was a war. And talking to
Mm.
other intuitives and psychics, they thought it was the same. They thought it was a war. And
Yes.
I felt like we were all going to kind of hunker down for a while.
I've heard a lot
And
about these predictions. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm not one of those people that, I'm not Chicken Little. I don't scream from the rooftop. I did talk about presidential predictions this last year. I guess it's been, yeah, almost a year and a half
Right.
ago. I did talk about that, but again, I'm not Chicken Little. I don't, threaten or forewarn. I usually keep these feelings to myself, or in this case, in my spouse. And I just said, I just have this feeling. And whenever I get these feelings in our marriage, my husband says, okay, we'll monitor it and we'll act on it if necessary. But then once I tell him I have a feeling, he'll go, okay. And he kind of goes on alert, or just kind of, he kind of gets a little bit of heightened awareness from
Mhm.
his standpoint on what he can do. So with the pandemic, though, I definitely felt this coming. And the wonderful thing is, though, I really do feel like we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, which is wonderful. I do feel like this summer there's going to be a lot more people traveling. There are going to be pockets, and I think for years to come, we're going to have little pockets of
Yeah.
isolation where people have to hunker down. We are going to need more vaccines, and it's going to become sort of like a flu shot. You'll get your flu shot and you'll feel, you'll get your vaccine update. I don't feel anything negative about the vaccines. I've always felt very positive about them. I do feel like, and this is even before the vaccines were released, I do feel like there's little minor differences between them, where on a health visit 5 years from now, you're going to mark down which vaccine you got. But these are real minor variations, real minor things that it's just going to be noted on your medical record for what vaccine you received, and if you had COVID, I do feel like there's help for long haul COVID survivors as well. That
Right.
there's going to be more and more research. There's going to be a lot more that goes into that. And so I do feel for people that are suffering from that, unfortunately, that there is going to be relief in the next coming years as hundreds of thousands of us come to terms with that and go down that journey.
I actually, I didn't expect us to talk about COVID in this episode, but I like that you are, because I have a question that just came up. And I want to just disclaim, like, I'm vaccinated and boosted. I encourage everyone to go and get their vaccines if their health allows them to do so. But to each their own, as long as you're doing the safest practices to keep their community safe. That being said, do you experience, as I do, that there is a really huge segment of the intuitive psychic community that is really anti-vax? And what are your feelings on that?
Oh wow, this is where I'm a science person. I trust the science. I trust my intuition, but I trust the science. And I as well our intuition, if as psychics and intuitives we are asking people to kind of trust and then verify, the same can be said for science. Do I respect
Mhm.
other people's positions? Yes. But I also do question, we all just like in news, if you go to journalism school or you study journalism, you learn that all news is biased. Well, the same thing with psychics and animal communicators, we're all biased. And I think it's important that before each session we check our biases at the door. Now I have to do this. I have learned, I remember in the very beginning of chatting with animals professionally, I really didn't think that animals reincarnated a whole bunch. And that bias, I think, held me back a little bit. And the more I kind of opened up to letting the animal speak for itself, in other words, really not including my biases, and I realized animal reincarnation happens so much more. So the same could be said with that segment of our community. I would just hope that those people are checking their own biases and are can step back and say, am I feeling this way because of some other things? Is there something else that's making me feel this way? Unfortunately, I'm seeing it a lot on TikTok, and I don't engage. I try not to honestly engage with vaccination talk with my clients unless they ask me. There have been a few clients that have said, I don't want to get the shot, and we talk about the outcomes of that. And to each their own. Again, I respect everyone's personal choice.
Right.
It is a personal choice. I do question, however, those intuitives that are quite anti-vax to just question what are their biases.
Right. I'm of the mindset that it's an individual choice. I totally agree with everything you just said. And when it comes to the psychic intuitive community, I feel like we should leave it up to the people that are within our community or our clients. Like, it's not up to us to tell a client, unless we're medical intuitive, which is quite a
Mhm,
different story. But
mhm,
I don't think it's like, if a client were to ask me, should I get the vaccine? I would tell them, well, that's up to you. I can give you my
mhm,
encouragement to get it, but
mhm,
that's really your choice. And as long as you are doing what you can to keep your community safe and your loved
mhm.
ones safe, that's all that matters. But that's really wonderful insight. Thank you for sharing that. And I actually want to go back to your childhood, if I may. And I want to thank you for sharing your experiences from childhood. I know that they may not always feel easy to share. So when you were a child and going through the shame and the guilt tripping from your community, was there anybody in your community that resembled your experiences at all? Or did you feel like the world against you?
It was definitely the world against me. I grew up in a community of 700. And
Wow.
so, yes, no, it was everything was very black and white. You went to church, there was two church, there was a Protestant church and a Catholic church. I believe there was a Chinese Baptist, or not Chinese Baptist, a Chinese Buddhist temple across the river, but no one talked about it. It was very isolated in that sense from other opinions. And of course, this is in the very early 80s, no internet to speak of. I did read voraciously from the little tiny library, and I would
Mm.
read the real spiritual books I could get my hand on was actually about aliens. There wasn't a lot on psychics at the library in the 80s, but there was about UFOs and Area 51 and all of that stuff. So that's what I read, which further concerned my mother and further uh, pushed me on more psychotropic drugs. So no, I didn't have any role models, and I was convinced for a very, very long time that I was damned, that I was an anomaly.
It's interesting because I mean, as a gay man, I had that experience with my sexuality, and I've heard several or many
Mhm,
intuitives share the same
mhm,
experience of it coming out of a quote unquote coming
mhm.
out of the closet. There's an extent to which I can relate to your experience, but I know it's quite different. And given the experience you had as a child, how did you delve confidently into the field of intuitive work? Because that's not an easy thing to delve into confidently after that experience. I would imagine. I don't want to place that mindset on you looking at your past, but how did you just delve into it? What gave you the courage to just go into it?
Life experience, going through tragedy after tragedy after tragedy in my life, and things kept happening to me, and my family would say, everything bad happens to you, everything. I had, abuse on several different levels, and it was just one thing after another. It was there were a there was, times abusing alcohol, there was times just I was trying to escape. I didn't have a lot of coping mechanisms and lots of therapy. And I have what I called my starter marriage because I was trying to escape. I got married in Vegas, which I suggest is really fun to do if you're going to get married. Vegas is always a fun choice. I didn't get married by Vegas, but I got married at 21, and I actually shaved my head like a month before, just because it was me just screaming for help, screaming for acceptance, and I was doing anything I could. And this man was very nice that I got married, and unfortunately it didn't last. But then you have a divorce, and then you have just experience after experience that just it was bricks that just kept going down. And honestly, I think it was having a spouse that just loved me for everything I was. And I spoke in the very beginning about the night that I went to go finish my life and end my life. And I came back, and my husband was waiting for me. I hadn't brought my phone, and I told him I needed help, and he agreed. And then I had this brainstorm later that night to do this, to be able to help. And I woke up and I told him, and he just said, if that's what you need to do, do it. And so it started with one person saying, I love you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to walk away. That if this is what you need, do it. And I actually started under a fake name for about a year because, again, my husband's in the Navy. I didn't want him hurting his career. That was my main concern for the first year, was just not hurting my family. And then it got to about 12 months out, and I started, I was traveling a little bit, and I was really starting to pick up routine clients, and I had this feeling like I was out, but I wasn't fully out. And I went to my husband again and I said, okay, this is what I'm thinking, but I wanted his blessing. And he just said, screw it. He said, I don't care about what people think of me. He said, you are shining, you are helping. He said, go for it.
Mm.
And so it took one person, and from that, it is definitely snowballed. It went from my husband, and it went from through a very supportive neighbor, actually, that I would sit and talk to her, and I would be like, oh, your uncle is here and saying hi. And she kept saying, you need to do this, Nancy, you need to do this. Oh no, because I was so terrified of the rejection, because that's one of my life themes, is rejection, rejection, rejection. I was so terrified of people turning their back on me, as was the case. And what I found is that there were quite a few backs that turned, but there were also a lot of people that turned towards me. And I found, as you would say in Hawaii, an ohana in friends that just embraced me. And some relationships have ended, some friendships have ended, some family relationships have ended, and that's okay, because I'm living my truth, and I'm sure you can relate to this. And as long as I'm not hurting anyone, as long I really, I stand by my truth and authenticity, as long as I'm not taking advantage of anyone, I'm not,
100%.
I'm not trying to get a boat or an extra house, or I'm not aiming to do anything more than now pay for one of my child's college educations. That's my that's my goal from working. But as long as my intentions are good, and as long as I'm not hurting anyone, that's what matters to me. And if someone doesn't agree with that, if someone still doesn't agree with it, that's not that's not my burden to carry anymore. I carried that burden for 37 years of
Right.
being so concerned about what other people think. And I realize now it was never about me to begin with. The nuns that were saying blasphemous stuff about me, that wasn't about me. That was about them. The people in the community that laughed and pointed their finger, that wasn't about me. That was them. And so I drew my strength from my best friend, my dearest friend, as I call him. And to this day, that's what gets me through. And it's amazing how, people say this a lot with children, that, it takes one person to really believe in a child. And I think in a lot of ways, I was very much still a child emotionally, because I was damaged goods. I had been abused, and I had gone through all this crap, and I had been divorced, and I had so many scarlet letters tacked to me that, I was so weighed down. And yet I had this one person that just said, no, I'm here. And that's what I needed. I just needed someone to tell me they weren't going to leave, which is ironic because he isn't here because he's in the Navy, which is, of course, that's the universe's joke on me, is like, okay, we're going to give you your best friend, but they're not going to be with you.
Well, unconditional love is it's beyond distance. And I think that is just what we are, I believe, what we are here on this planet to experience, hopefully experience, to seek out or give out unconditional love.
100%. The one thing I've really learned, though, about people that are terrified about their own intuition, their own feelings, whatever it is that you have that gift inside, because we all have something to get out, whether it's art or dance or music or poetry or whatever it is that we are meant to share with the world. We are so afraid of that rejection. And it's just understanding quintessentially, if someone says something, if someone says you're not worth it, if someone says you're this or you're that, it's not about you.
Yes.
It's not about you.
Yes, that is 8 years of therapy for me, summed up in one, and more therapy to come for me. So thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you, and I'm about to ask you, what has been so far? I'm sure you've had many impactful experiences with clients and with animals. I'm about to ask you what has been your most impactful, but I first want to ask you, what was the experience in the first year or two that you were delving into this work professionally that just made you think, aha, this is what I am truly meant to do?
I think the first time I helped find a pet, which was incredible because it wasn't something I planned on, it as is everything else in my life. I was literally getting out of the shower and I got a message on social media saying, can you help me find my dog? And I said, I don't find pets. And they said, please, it's diabetic. Please, it's been gone a few days. And I said, okay. Because of course the helper in me goes, okay. And they ended up being found less than 24 hours later, right where I said near death, but he's still alive. And it happened, of course, as it does. They live just across. I'm in Connecticut on the Sound, and the dog is just across the Long Island Sound. And I'm still very close with the family of the dog. But I think that was the moment that I realized, no kidding, this is impactful. I think another impactful experience was the first time I walked an animal across the Rainbow Bridge or passed on. To go through that was such an honor. It was also one of the first dogs I read, which was incredible because the owner had come to me, and she was an acquaintance, but she'd come to me thinking that her name was Cleo, the dog, and Cleo was ready to die. And in fact, Cleo is where I realized that animals had a bucket list. And so Cleo gave me this wonderful bucket list of things that she wanted to do, including going and chasing the seagulls on the beach, et cetera, et cetera. And it was actually at the very beginning of COVID, right around the time that I found the lost dog in Long Island. And the client texted me and said, she's getting ready to pass. And I remember it was so scary because we didn't know much about COVID. And I went over and I had my shoes off and I had all these masks on. And the experience was so insane, from even pulling up and seeing a black dog cross my path with an owner, and then walking into Cleo's room where she was laying, and Cleo lifts her head and I heard clearly, are you taking me? Are you the one taking me over? To realizing that the black dog that I saw was actually related to her best friend that was waiting for her that this black dog was waiting for her to pass. And the black dog that I
Oh,
had seen was the new black dog that the neighbor had gotten. But of all
wow.
the coincidences that are not coincidences at all,
Nope.
to walk her across. And what's beautiful about that experience is that soon after Cleo passed, her owner had a dream, and Cleo had her name in lights, and Cleo told her, people will be talking about me. And the client shared with me the dream. And in fact, a year later, I ended up in Dogster magazine talking about Cleo and talking about the bucket list. So in fact, thousands of people have read about Cleo.
Wow.
So as far as animals, those are the two big experiences that I've had. People, there have been many, but I think each part of my work, from working with people that have passed over to animals passed over to lost pets, there have each been those moments that just solidify for me. The most recent is actually a couple days ago, and I was actually just speaking to her as we got on. Was I have a current client who unfortunately lost her dad 2 nights ago, and she said, "Please, can you give me something?" And I said, "Of course, of course." And I had 10 minutes between sessions, and I quickly called her up, and her dad started going on about wearing a Hawaiian shirt and having a beer, and he was very excited to tell her that he was having a beer with his buddies, and it all lined up with him and his personality. But he was so excited there was beer in heaven. Like, that was the first thing he wanted her to know. And she started laughing and said, "He hasn't had a drink in a year
Oh, that's
because of da, da, da,
hilarious.
da." But that was the first thing that he said was, "Look, I'm having a
Wow.
drink in my Hawaiian shirt." And he was like threatening that he didn't want to be buried in a suit. And at that moment, unbeknownst to me, my client's mom was talking about putting him in a suit, and so he was automatically going off on the mom on his wife, going, "Don't you dare put me in a suit."
I
So
love that.
it's every client like that. To be honest, I was afraid of death. I was so terrified of death, so terrified of death, and I had all this knowledge in me, and I still was absolutely terrified to die. And it has taken 3 years, but every session I have means something to me as well. And each session gives me more faith and more belief, because, as I say, I am the biggest skeptic. But I look back at the thousands of pets I've talked to that have passed over, and the thousands of people, and I go, this can't all be just coincidence, or else I have the most amazing luck and I need to play the lottery. Like,
Exactly. That's how I feel too, as a fellow skeptic. And it's insane you mentioned the fear of death, because this has been a I've always been afraid of death. I used to have panic attacks about it. And by the time this episode airs, I will have already published an episode about the fear of death. And I always wonder if there are more intuitives out there than I imagine, that are or have been afraid of death as intensely as I have. With the animals that you've channeled, because I'm curious about one question that I have. What are the range of animals in the animal kingdom you channel? Like, have you channeled lizards?
yes,
Eh,
skinks. I've channeled snails, skinks, uh, water snails, tortoises, snakes. I have channeled gerbils, hamsters, rats, ferrets. The smallest thing I think has been a snail, or a type of what are the killing fish, or the not the guppies? What are they called? The fish that have to live alone because they kill the others. Oh my gosh,
oh, I
I
don't
can't think.
know.
Oh, it's some cool fish that people have. So I've talked to fish. The biggest thing I've talked to in the wild, I've connected with wolves, but wild animals are a little different to connect with. I connected with a whale that was probably one of
Oh, wow.
the most beautiful spiritual experiences of my life, and it felt like minutes, and it was probably 30 seconds, and that was quite a few years ago, but I can pull it up like it was yesterday in my brain. So I've connected with just about everything. Squirrels are a big one that actually you wouldn't think you connect a lot with, but squirrels have a fantastic sense of humor. I work with a lot of wildlife rehabilitation centers across the world to deal with different types of birds. There's a bird in New England that is a guard cockatiel that will not let you touch its quote unquote baby, which is its human baby, that protects this baby with its life. that really doesn't actually think it's its parent, but thinks it's his job to protect. So I love
Mm.
talking with birds, parakeets, finches. I've talked to just about everything, or that you would think is common.
And I feel like I might know the answer to this question, but I don't want to assume because maybe a listener is wondering too. Do the energies of, say, reptiles differ from the energies of mammals and fish?
So the way I describe it is the more intelligent an animal, the different it's going to sound. So for instance, for pigs, which are pigs, dolphins, what are, the most intelligent animals. So let's go pigs, horses, cats, dogs. I'm going to get words in addition to images. So I'm going to get maybe 2 or 3 words and images. That's why I tell a lot of people to, when you're speaking to your pet, speak in 3 to 4 words. Don't try and say anymore. When you get lower in, I guess, in types of brain activity or what have you, I get more images as opposed to words. Like
Hmm.
horses are amazing with language. Horses will really throw out some interesting words and description, just like a lot more adjectives. But when you're talking about a turtle, it's going to be a lot more images. So for instance, I'm working with this lost tortoise, and this tortoise, when I say it's lost, it is in probably a football field's away from its owner. And I've worked with this tortoise for the last year, and it just stubbornly does not want to come home, but it lives in the high grass and it does not want to come home. And he shows me where he is, and he shows me images, not so much images or not so much words. I might get hot, cold, warm
Hmm.
feelings, but I get a lot of images. And this tortoise knows what it's doing. It knows what it's doing, knows what it's doing. It just refuses to come back. So that's a funny story. But no, so I get a lot more images, kind of the smaller brained, if you will, you go.
That's so fascinating. And I'm wondering, is there an experience you've had with an animal that just brought so much that was funny or really unexpected that you remember?
Yes. I actually have the story on my TikTok. So there was a ferret named Molly, and this man had lost Molly unexpectedly and somewhat tragically. And Molly talked about one of its favorite things to do with her owner was to sit on its shoulder and eat peanuts. And Molly described its owner's bag. It was this like green messenger bag, and she would go and get peanuts and eat peanuts with its owner after work. And this gentleman, and he was this kind of wide shouldered, burly kind of gentleman, not someone you want to meet in a dark alley, real tough guy. And he goes, peanuts. What? And I was terrified. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm blowing this. He goes, peanuts. What is she talking about? And I said, she just keeps saying peanuts, and she's pulling it out and she's rolling it in her hand, and she's coming and she's sitting on your shoulder and she's eating them. And she says, you're eating them too. And all of a sudden, this guy lets out the biggest laugh, and he just starts cracking up. And he says, that those aren't peanuts. That's weed. That's bud.
Oh, oh my goodness.
So
That's
every night, Molly, which is funny because I think Molly and Mary Jane
oh
and
yeah, that's
so
hilarious. I didn't even think of
so
that. That's funny.
so every night Molly would choke up with its owner. Now I have to preface this with saying Molly did not die from an overdose of weed, and no, weed is not good for ferrets. So please, and this was something that the owner would do, and I don't even think honestly he really knew that she would just take little bites out of his bag, this little leftover little nibbles of weed, and she would sit there and eat weed with him. And it was an every night thing. And yes, she survived it. And again, I do not condone this. It's just, but I was laughing so hard I had tears in my eyes because I just what, and she was saying peanuts because it did in fact look like a peanut to her. She thought she was eating peanuts. She had no idea it was, I don't know how you would describe, drugs to a ferret, first of all,
Right.
but she just thought she was having a snack with her owner. And she thought, I'm having a snack with him. This is what we do every night. We have a snack together. And she slept really well with her owner afterwards. I mean,
I could
so,
imagine. Oh my
but
goodness.
that was their routine was, and I share, if you want to watch, I have a TikTok video about Molly the ferret, and this is all shared with the owner's permission. I never share stories without owner's permission, but that is probably my most memorable, just because it was so unexpected. because from the ferret's point of view, there was nothing nefarious going on. She just enjoyed a bite to eat with her owner. And to realize it was weed, it was just like, okay. And then her name was Molly. I was like, okay, this is just, you can't make this up.
Yeah, that is certainly memorable.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, I want to ask you, let's say someone comes to you and says, Nancy, I think I might be a medium. Where do I start? What do I do? What advice would you give to someone who's just starting out on their journey?
First, I would say you're not crazy. First and
Mhm.
foremost, you are not crazy. It is normal. You are okay. And to trust. Trust is huge. Allow it to flow. Louise Hay, the founder of Hay House, said, "Let the river flow." And I hate that term because I can't let the river flow. I'm always like, what do you mean let the river flow? But it's essentially, it's like you're on a roller coaster and you know how you're at the top and you start going down, and some people will raise up their arms and other people hold on for dear life. If you hold on, you're still going down. It's still happening.
That's me.
And what I tell you is raise your hands up.
Mm.
Raise your hands up and just allow it to go, or let the river flow, take your hands off the oars and just go with it. Don't overthink it, right? Overthinking is the worst thing you can do in intuition. You trust what you're hearing. And some of it is not, I mean, it's not all going to make sense. It's all going to, a lot of it's going to be gobbledygook. And that's when you learn to kind of compartmentalize and kind of put, you'll learn where to put things. And one more thing is, you're never going to put yourself in danger. So I know, like, so for instance, with the coronavirus, I felt like, okay, there's this, there's something really calming, but don't feel like you've got to, shout it from the heavens. Don't feel like if you're getting this feeling, trust it, let it flow through you, but don't feel like you have to act on every feeling unless, you're waking up at 2:00 in the morning and you just get this feeling. Those feelings, trust. But if you just get this foreboding about something, allow that feeling to flow through you, but don't feel like you need to be Chicken Little. That sometimes feelings like that will just, because we pick up on a lot of energy, and especially in the beginning when we don't know when to turn it off, which is why I like watching Housewives, because I just turn my brain off. So, but when you do that, you have to allow it to just kind of, it's in Buddhism, you talk about letting the clouds go by. And with those emotions, you have to let them kind of float by sometimes and not feel like there's an action with every single feeling there's not.
Great words of advice. So tell our listeners how they can find out more about you.
So you can find out more information about me on my website. It's nancymello.com, NancyMello.com. On social media, on Instagram, it's Nancy Mello Official. And on TikTok, it's nancy.mello. I'm on Facebook as well. It's Nancy Mello Official if you still use Facebook. So those are the three primary ways, but also just going to my website, nancymello.com.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Nancy, I feel so honored that I got to hear you share our story with us. That was knowing that you've been through so much and have come out strong on the other side and are still someone who is learning and is imparting advice to those of us who are like myself, who is a beginner in my developmental phase of mediumship. I feel so honored to hear your story and what you have to share as advice and recommendation. And this has been such a fascinating conversation. I've never spoken to an animal medium before, I either for this podcast or in my life. So this was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you have a question or topic you want me to cover on Third Eyesight, head to my website, juanfranciscospirit.com/contact, and send a message my way. If you really enjoyed this episode, leave a review wherever you listen. I'd really appreciate it.